this lesson where we are going to discuss ratios and proportions. A ratio. A ratio shows how many times one number contains another number. We can talk about some examples of how to write a ratio. You've probably seen these before. You could write a ratio as 4 to 7, 4 with a semicolon to 7, or a fraction, 4 over 7. Now, I will say this 4 over 7 as a fraction, it's probably going to be the most used option you will have for writing a ratio. Now, 3 different ways to write it, but they all represent the same ratio. Write a ratio expressing the slope of a line. Well, we need to be reminded of one thing. What is slope? Slope is rise over run. The change in y divided by the change in x. So when we go along this line, we want to find points that appear on this line. Now this line is made up of millions and millions of points. However, the points where they cross the grid, there are whole number points. Those are the ones we're interested in. My first point that I see is right here on this line. And as I travel, I'm going to go up, up, and that's the next time I see where the grid crosses right here. So that would be a second point I could make. Keep traveling up, and my final point's up here. Now, when we want to count the rise over the run, the rise, so if I'm going from this point to this point, I can't go diagonally. I need to go up and down, left and right. So the rise looks like I have to go up 1, 2, 3. And now from this point here, I need to count my distance to the next point, the remaining point. Well, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So my rise, same thing, up 3, run of 4. So my rise was 3, my run is 4. So if I write that as a ratio, I would write it as a fraction, 3 over 4. Be mindful when we're dealing with slope, if we have a negative slope, so something that's going downhill, my slope or my ratio would be negative. The ratio of the side lengths of a quadrilateral is 2, 3, 5, 7, and its perimeter is 85. Determine the length of each side. So a quadrilateral, that's a 4-sided figure, tells me that the ratio of each side length is 2, 3, 5, and 7. Now, if I add those 4 numbers up, I'm not going to get 85. But that's what we need when we find the perimeter. So with a ratio, that means that I'm going to have some common factor, some common number that I'm going to be able to multiply in order to come up with each side length. This side length would be 2 times that number, 3 times that number, 5 times that number, 7 times that number. Now, if the perimeter, if that means to add the side lengths of a shape, if I add my side lengths currently as they stand with this ratio, this unknown value, this is what it would look like. 2x plus 3x plus 5x plus 7x equals 85. Combine like terms, divide by 17, and x equals 5. So if I had to determine the length of each side, I'd go back to the 2x, I'd plug in a 5 for x. That side length would be 10. This one, 3 times 5, 15. 5 times 5, 25. 7 times 5, 35. Now, if we add those together, we end up with 85. It tells me that I know I got that correct. Now, if a question discusses angles, use your prior knowledge. Remember, a triangle, the angle measures adds up to is 180. All other shapes, remember you take the number of sides minus 2 times 180. That's what you were doing in your previous module. Proportion, when you set 2 ratios equal to one another. So if we had a ratio A over B equals C over D, that is called a proportion. An example might be 1 over 3 equals 4 over 12. If I reduce this, if I divide that by 4, divide that by 4, I would end up at 1 over 3. So these two ratios are equal, and we can call them a proportion. Solving proportions, we use our cross products property. So if we know this ratio, then we can cross multiply, telling us that A times D equals B times C. Now, just remember, it doesn't matter if I put the B times C on this side and the A times D on this side. Just know I have to multiply this denominator with this numerator and vice versa with the other option. So let's just show you how this works. Remember our ratio here, 1 over 3 equals 4 over 12. If I cross multiply, that would be 1 times 12 equals 3 times 4. 1 times 12 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. That checks out. That means our ratio is equal. Let's do this example. Now we have an unknown value, but if we use our cross products property, we multiply 45 times x, 5 times 63. They're going to equal each other. So 5 times 63, that's 315. We divide by 45 on both sides. We get x equals 7. Example 2. Now we have these quantities here. When we cross multiply and we have a quantity, that means I'm going to have to multiply this 45 with both terms, x minus 3. So what this looks like written out is we have 45 times x minus 3. I'm going to put that quantity in parentheses, and 10 times 3x minus 6. So we have to distribute the 45 to the x and the negative 3, which leaves us with 45x minus 135. We do the same thing on this side. Distribute the 10 to the 3 and distribute the 10 to the negative 6. So 10 times 3 is 30x. 10 times negative 6 is negative 60. Now we're after solving for x. Get the x's on the same side by subtracting 30 on both sides. We're left with 15x minus 135 equals a negative 60. Add 135 to both sides. We're left with 15x equals 75. Divide by 15, and x would equal